Hello and welcome to this video. As you can see, today I'm starting off my project with my laser cutter because I decided to make a clock town inspired wall decor. Now I currently don't need a clock, but I really like the design they added in Majora's Mask for the clock. So I decided to do my own version of that and I drew one up and I put it to cut out with wood on my laser cutter. I'm using birch ply here because it has a nice bit of wood grain that I think will pop out nicely. And in this case I'm using my X-Tool M1. Now, if you're curious, I'm actually purposefully letting the laser burn out the wood a bit. As you can see, there's a lot of black spaces. This laser actually has an attachment on the nozzle that I have for blowing a bit more air so the wood doesn't burn out as much, but I really wanted this old look, so I didn't use it. Plus, with all the details, it's also kind of inconvenient sometimes to use it if you have smaller cuts, because the pieces can fly away, so you need to cut them a bit more separately. But, you know, since I wanted to go with the old look anyways, that's totally fine. Now, in this case, for this project, I'm just going to use watercolors for all the coloring, because I didn't want to put up wood stain or inks in other colors, and you know, watercolors do work fine. Obviously, you need to be a bit more careful with sealing them, because they reactivate, but I think they really bring out the wood grain nicely. They only, in some cases, need a couple more layers after the first one dries, because it usually gets a bit more muted than you actually wanted to, but I think you can get some really nice colors with watercolors on any wood. So I decided to, paint everything with them, and I'm going to start painting, but I also need to trim some pieces because the wood was a bit uneven, so the laser didn't fully cut through some pieces. It rarely happens, but as you can see, it happened kind of in the middle on some points where the laser couldn't fully reach through. The thing is, I don't really want to put too much power in it because it likes to cut in the underlying plate, and I really didn't want that. But in the end, it was pretty easy to save it out. I needed one piece that was really thin and broke, but that wasn't even one of the pieces that I couldn't get loose. Now, in all of these cases, of course, the first thing I'm going to do is paint them with watercolors, and then I'm gluing them in. And the glue I'm using is vinyl glue. It also works on wood really well, and it's a nice craft glue, and I have a large bottle of it. So this should work really nicely. Now, of course, the elephant in the room is I'm not going to use this as a clock. I have more than enough clocks. I just, I'm going to hang it up on my wall. But I can always, if I want another clock, use this. The spacing on the arm things and on the side decor is even out, so everything has the same radius to each other, so it's actually a perfect clock. So if I ever want to use this as a clock, all I need to do is drill a hole in the middle and insert a clock mechanism with some hands, and I could totally do that. But yeah, as I said, I have enough clocks. I just really want a colorful little wall decor. Now, I could have just engraved the pieces on the top layer, but I decided to fully cut them out and color them separately because I thought that would be a bit easier. But in the end, after I colored them, I have to go over that anyways after I glued them in already, and I realized it doesn't really make a difference. Maybe a bit in bleeding since the pieces aren't connected, but I think you could as well just engrave the, upper decor part, just make a bit larger circle for the bottom, just keep the circle on top, and just, not cut the pieces out but engrave. I did have some problems because some of the pieces were so small that I kind of got lost a bit, so I had to puzzle a bit. And also, one thing I'm going to do with some of the smaller pieces is I'm not going to immediately apply the glue. I'm going to put them in there and then later water down the glue a bit and really saturate the piece to fixate them, and that should work pretty well. Also, I do have to say it was quite satisfying to put them in place because it was kind of a really nicely fitting puzzle. I had to use my glue bottle sometimes to push them down a little because the pieces kept lifting. I guess the wood, bent a tiny bit with the moisture I added from the watercolors, but once everything was glued down, it worked out perfectly, so I wasn't worried about anything. some of the colors and some of the shapes aren't fully true to the original Majora's Mask design. I kind of went with like a mixture of like a couple of designs I found online from artists and of course from the original game. And I think the one I came up with is really nice and fits really well. Also added this like little octagon on the bottom that I think gives a little bit more flair. This was actually a lot of fun to design with the arrows, but it was a bit harder to, cut off. Originally I wanted to 3D print this, and I did in wood filament, and then I wanted to fill it in with resin. The thing is that at the sides it just didn't look right. Like the wood filament looked nice, but like I wanted the wood grain way more than, anything, because the original design has a lot of wood grain, and I think that adds to the charm of it. So, in going with the wood grain and the purposely burned out edges for this, it gave it this like really nice old and like kind of handmade look a little bit. And I think that's, way more fitting for this clock than just 3D printing it and filling it up with resin. So I think making it in resin at some point could be quite fun. But for now I'm super happy with this. Plus it's a bit more lightweight, so I can just, add it on my wall without any troubles and without having to like use huge fastenings. All I needed to use was some wall hanging tape and then, stick it on, since this wood is pretty light. Also, it was actually a lot of fun to like put the pieces in place, as I said, and it was also a lot of fun coloring them again. There were some pieces that it was annoying to maneuver around, especially after they were glued in, but because you can see that some of the colors, especially the white and the yellows and stuff, they like really got washed out after they fully dried, and I guess that's just because, most colors appear darker before they dry. And in this case, that really got soaked into the wood, that water, so it made it look darker anyways. So I went over some with like 2 more coats of paint and some pieces with like 1 more coat. The one that I gave 2 coats were mainly just the whites, but like any of the reds, the blues and the yellows and stuff, they only got 1 more coat. But yeah, overall this was a lot of fun to make and a lot of fun to puzzle. And I'm really happy that it like turned out in the way I wanted it to. Plus, I also have the thing that I feel like I'm using my laser cutter way too little in projects. Like I'm 3D printing all the time because that's also kind of my job. But, having a laser cutter and not using it is just such a shame. Like usually when I'm using it, it's for like making acrylic signs or something that somebody in my family wants and needs, or like, anything like that. That is very simple, but I usually don't really use it in too many of my crafting projects. So maybe I can find like some projects where it really will like be nice to use my laser cutter a bit more, like this one. And it's kind of fun to watch the laser also cut these pieces, although cutting this out took 2 hours in total with all the fine details and the rings. But overall it turned out super well. Plus I do not mind the wood smell at all that you get. It's a really nice smell in my opinion, and yeah, I guess you need to like it. Acrylic does stink a bit more, but I have an air filter, but yeah, the wood smell like filling the whole apartment. Even if it's summer, it's a really nice one. as I mentioned before, there are some loose pieces here, so I went over it with the thinned out glue and just applied it on top, like really making sure it saturates in between the gaps. Now, some of the colors and especially some of the burnout really liked to smudge, but that is fine. I'm going to like remove the top coat of the glue on the wood immediately anyways before it dries, so it shouldn't leave too many smudges. Now, there will be some slight ones left on the white and stuff, but I think that's also adding nicely to the weathering. But as you can see, I'm just patting it down with a lot of paper towels, and it actually transfers the image quite nicely, which I think is kind of fun. But yeah, as you can see, there's hardly any smudging, and then I just put a sheet of baking paper on there, like a flat surface, and then I put like a lot of books on there, and shake test, nothing fell off. After it was dry, I let it dry for like a couple hours, and yeah, it worked perfectly. Now, the one last thing I wanted to do is I wanted to protect it from smudging. Since I'm going to hang it on a white wall, I didn't want any of the like wood burnout or any of the like coloring to smudge if it gets more humid or something. So I coated it in some matte varnish. This is just some standard acrylic matte varnish that I also usually use for my paintings. And it worked out really well in the end. I think like a little bit of the glue already like protected the color from bleeding a bit. I just had to remove like tiny bits and then stipple on some on especially the white parts, but in the end, you know, turned out actually pretty perfect. And of course, I'm really happy to finally have this piece on my wall. I actually made the design like a year ago, and I just could never really find the like inspiration to actually make it into a piece, but I'm happy I finally did now, because it just looks so fun and it adds a nice pop of color and all that. But as always, let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts were on this project, and also as always, I hope you will have a great day. See you next time, bye bye!